Well, I think it's time to start. So let me wish you, first of all, a good afternoon. I'm Camilla Benbow, and I'm Dean of the Peabody College. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce this panel, which Peabody is sponsoring as part of today's symposium, Exploring the Legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. One of the character traits of Peabody College has been a concern for the education and flourishing of all people. As early as the 1960s, Peabody had faculty members who studied the negative effects of poverty on young children. And they worked to ameliorate those effects by designing educational interventions that inspired the establishment of the federal Head Start program. If you know me, you hear me all the time bragging about that. Anyway, our work on inclusive education for those with disabilities, on the disproportionate assignment of racial minorities to special education, or on students who face learning challenges because of language or cultural barriers is well known. Even so, we know that a truly equal education remains an ideal that our society has yet to achieve. Our communities and schools continue to suffer from deep structural injustices and racial bias. Today's panel will explore this theme through the voices of several Peabody faculty members and one exciting guest. We think so. Nicole Joseph, our moderator, is Assistant Professor of Mathematics Education. Her research focuses on the experiences of Black women and girls in the domain of math with the goal of increasing representation and achievement by Black females in this field. Last fall, Nicole organized a march on campus for Black women in STEM in conjunction with the National Black Women's March in Washington, D.C. In April, the American Educational Research Association recognized her scholarship with not one, but 2 early career awards for her research. Ebony McGee, Associate Professor of Education, Diversity and STEM Education, has also been recognized for her contributions as a scholar of color. Her studies of the experiences of minority students in STEM in higher education have yielded important insights about the imposter syndrome and the deep insecurities and conflicted attitudes that even talented students feel in academic or work environments that don't look much like the places from which they've come. Donna Ford, unfortunately, could not attend today, but I'm pleased that her spot will be filled by Assistant Professor Tesha Sengupta-Irvin. Professor Sengupta-Irvin is a former engineer who began teaching math to incarcerated youth and to adults seeking their GEDs. She went on to teach secondary schools in the Compton and San Mateo, California school districts. She completed her PhD at Stanford and a postdoc at UCLA. As a researcher, Professor Sengupta-Irvin seeks to reclaim mathematics as a humanizing experience or enterprise. The question that drives her work is, what, in addition to mathematics, do children learn when they learn math? Finally, Nick Stone is the non-faculty member of our Peabody panel, and we are very excited to include her. Nick is the author of an acclaimed young adult novel, Dear Martin, which was published in 2017. Born and raised in a suburb of Atlanta, after graduating from Spelman College, Nick worked as a mentor for teens. She also lived and worked in Israel for several years before returning to the U.S. to write full-time. In Dear Martin, Justice McAllister, a stellar young African-American student, captain of the debate team, and on track to attend the Ivy League college. However, after an encounter with police and the criminal justice system, he finds himself deeply unsettled. I think you're going to have to read the book to see what happens. Before turning things over to Professor Joseph to begin our discussion, I also want to thank Professor Ana Cristina da Silva for her leadership in organizing today's panel and Peabody's participation in this symposium. I'm very grateful to each of the panelists for their commitment to offering a provocative and inspiring discussion, but most of all, thank you. Where are you? There you are, stand up. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Benbow. I also want to thank the committee that chose me to moderate this momentous occasion and event, and I'm really excited to be here. I consider myself a pedagogue, which means that I think about teaching and learning and how to create meaningful experiences, regardless if I am in the classroom or doing something like this. So I tried to put something together that's a little bit more interactive, a little bit more hopefully exciting for the panel as well as for the audience. I would like to open up with a passage from Nick's book.
Oh boy.
August 25th. Dear Martin, well, I'm here. The illustrious Yale University. I'm actually writing this from beneath a picture of you that SJ hung over my desk. It was a going away gift from Doc. I gotta be honest, Martin, your picture is making me a little uncomfortable. Actually, no, I take that back. It's not your picture, it's being here at this school. A lot has happened since I last wrote to you, most of which I haven't really had time to process. Hard to believe that this time last year I was starting my whole experiment. What I find most interesting reading through the letters, I can't figure out what I was trying to accomplish. Yeah, I wanted to be like Martin, but to what end? I wasn't trying to move mountains of injustice or fight for the equal rights of masses of people. So what exactly was I trying to achieve? I've been thinking about it for days and haven't come up with an answer. On the other hand, I feel I should thank you. While there were Black students at Yale as early as the 1850s, I doubt I would be here without all you did to challenge the status quo, as Doc would put it. So I just wanted to set the tone and set the stage because I think that passage really helps us to talk about and to think about the tensions in the struggle for racial justice. Oh yeah, look at this fancy stuff. So, I went and chose images for our panels as a way, or for our panelists, as a way for them to introduce themselves in more creative ways. And so the question that I would like to begin is to ask them, what are the epistemological contexts of your work, your personhood, your life? In other words, why do you do what you do? And you can choose to use these images, or you can choose to use something else if you would like to. And I would like for you to take about 3 minutes to answer that question. Dr. McGee, would you be so kind to start us off?
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me? Thank you so much. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Anne. Thanks to our panelists. I'm really excited to be here. So I too am a former engineer. I like to say a recovering engineer, but I'll get to that in a minute. So my work attempts to problematize traditional notions of success, particularly in marginalized students in STEM fields, mostly in higher ed. So the traditional way that we assess success in students of color in STEM are through GPAs, test scores, coveted internships, and other very traditional forms of achievement. So I was cool with this about 10 years ago. And when I went to look at students who embodied those characteristics, I saw that something else was happening. They were traumatized. They were made to feel many days and in many ways as though they didn't belong. So I knew something else was happening, and I know that I needed to expand the definition of success to include mental, emotional, and physical well-being. And I wanted the students to not just simply survive their STEM experiences, but to thrive. So that has led me to understanding not just their outcomes, but what happens as a result of higher education, what happens as a result of structural racism, where in spite of having all the accolades that many of their white and some Asian peers have, they are still positioned as imposters, or they still endure racial battle fatigue, or they are consistently stereotyped. And this marginalization doesn't necessarily show up in their GPAs. This marginalization shows up in miscarriages and fibroids. We're talking about 19-year-olds, and a host of other mental and physical trauma. So my research has tried to understand that. And most recently, I've extended that to, well, what if they're not traumatized? There's still material costs because of structural racism. So you take a white male, a white man and a black man, raised in the same street, on the same neighborhood, going to the same schools, went to the same college, got the same engineering degree. The white man is going to be paid $10,000 to $14,000 more than the black man. The white man's mortality rate is going to be 6 to 7 years more than the black man. And there's just a host, I could name 100 other things, you know, in addition to being stopped by the police in their own upper middle class, mostly white neighborhood, that also cause trauma. So even if you don't thrive in STEM, you still face challenges throughout the STEM professional pipeline. And I think that's my 3 minutes.
Thank you. Nick, would you like to go next?
You are preaching, Miss Ebony.
Okay,
Um,
testify.
And you just like gave me this very nice thing to kind of piggyback on. So literally everything you said. There's a scene in this novel where the kid who's represented on the cover, he is kind of he's the top of his class, he's doing everything right. There's a night that he's racially profiled while trying to assist his ex-girlfriend who has been drinking. And out of the experience, he decides he's going to start this journal of letters to Dr. King. And it's his way of picking the world apart with Dr. King's teachings as a lens. There's a scene in this book where he is in his classroom. The main antagonist of this book is a kind of hyper-privileged white boy who is fully convinced that racism is no longer a thing. And they're having this conversation in the classroom. Justice has been admitted to Yale, early action. Jared has been deferred, and Jared is not happy about it. So they start this discussion. It turns out that they are not only equally matched, but that Justice has actually gotten the higher ACT score. And Jared just doesn't believe him. And that is something that I pulled from my own life. I had an incident my senior year of high school, was talking about test scores with a friend, and I think my ACT composite score was like 2 points higher than hers. And she looked me in my face and she said, "There's no way you got a higher score than me." And, you know, as a person who worked to achieve the things that I achieved, everything that you just said is so true. My work why I write specifically for high schoolers. Over the past 2 days, I was in high schools in Iowa, which were actually a lot more diverse than I was expecting. But I went to 4 high schools in Iowa, and what I feel like my role and my job is through my books and through my opportunities to interact with these kids is to get them to notice the things around them that they are going to have to change. Because, of course, as the world progresses, eventually they are going to be the people running for office. They are going to be the people who are teaching the next generation. And I want kids 12 to 18 to recognize that they are powerful and that the things that they notice around them, the things that they're experiencing are valid and that they have like weight and merit. So that is what my work is about. This is really cool, like being in a room full of grown-ups. I'm like, this never happens. So hey, y'all, like y'all are my people. Hi.
You think we're grown up.
I mean, we got to pay bills.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. When I saw this question from Nicole and when I hear it again here, it's hard for me not to think about origin stories in terms of why we come to the work we do. And I think all of us have versions of an origin story. I came to this country as an immigrant when I was 2.5 years old. My father actually came on the same program that brought Obama's father to the US. So we landed first in Honolulu, Hawaii, and all of my formative years were spent in the Hawaiian Islands. For anyone who has been to Hawaii or is from Hawaii, it's an interestingly multiracial, multicultural space. And as I say that, I am not going to suggest in any way that they have figured out racial justice. There are tremendous problems in Hawaii, but it means I was more likely to meet people who were mixed than not. But it gives you a very different way to think about the world and racial justice when that is in fact the norm around you. But what was also interesting about growing up in Hawaii is that I grew up my most formative years in terms of middle and high school during the movement called Onipa'a, which stands for steadfast. It was a movement by indigenous Hawaiians and Polynesians to secede from the United States. We were the 50th state, and we didn't want to be. And in those high school years, I was president of Amnesty International. I thought a lot about human rights. I felt very self-righteous, as one is prone to be in high school, or other times. What being a part of those rallies for Onipa'a taught me was that although I had understood inequality as a woman of color, as a language minority member of the community, as a religious minority in the United States, i.e. from a mostly subjugated position, I was also a settler colonialist. I was occupying land. And I may not have been the one who displaced the people on the land, but I am reaping the benefits of it.
Phew.
And in an early point in my life, I realized the complexity of justice. And that in fact, if I am not willing to recognize justice as a kind of bowl of fish hooks, where you don't get to pick and choose the dimensions of justice that serve you, but also the ones that might very well undermine the house you live in, literally, as we sit here on occupied land, then you're not ready. And you can't run from it. You have to lean into it. This has been a recurring theme throughout my life, leaning into what Eve Tuck describes as complex personhood. When I, in fact, worked with incarcerated youth and adults, I was working as an electrical engineer for Hewlett-Packard. During the day, I worked as an engineer. At nights, I started with domestic violence, and then I started helping folks in the prisons that wanted to pursue a GED, whose life histories in relationship to education could not have been further than my own. I loved school. I could not fathom that someone would find no belonging in school until I met my students. And I realized, again, that my privilege came at another's subjugation. American public schools are set up for some children to succeed, and by definition, therefore, others to fail. And again, I was implicated in the ways that these young people were fighting so hard to get out, and I never even knew they were in. Later in my life, when I became a teacher in the Compton Unified School District under state takeover, I was reminded again of the beauty and brilliance of youth and the ways in which we as adults mess up their lives consistently, every day, and often. And it motivated me to pursue a degree in education. My parents stopped talking to me for 6 months. And now I am married to an African-American man, and I have 2 biracial young children. We are an integrated family living in the segregated South. And at best, maybe this is the desegregated South, but this is not an integrated place. And we are an integrated family, and we bump against that difference every day. We are Christian and non-Christian, black and brown, immigrant and domestic. I don't know why he calls himself that. And so we can go to the JCC and someone can joke, "Are you terrorists?" And we can get stopped by the police. It is a perplexing and disorienting time in my life. And when I come to Vanderbilt every day, I contend with what that means when I work with teachers. People who, when I look at you, I think you are teaching somebody's baby, and on my watch, you are going to try to do it right. And it motivates the work I do, and I'm not ashamed to say that motherhood has made me a better scholar. Let me stop there.
Or not, or just keep
In
going.
3 minutes, I'm sure.
As the theologian would say, would you like to take a text? Thank you.
We are in church.
So where did we go from here was Chaos of Community was the last book that Dr. King wrote before he was assassinated. One of the central themes of this book are messages of hope. He discusses questions of what African Americans should do with their newfound freedoms found in laws such as the Voting Rights of 1965. He
concludes that all Americans must unite in order to fight poverty and create an equality of opportunity. So the next question is, can you please take 3 minutes to choose one of these contexts? It could be higher ed, it could be community, it could be K-12, whatever you feel drawn to, and discuss your vision of hope, of equality, of equality of opportunity.
Okay, guess we're going in order here. So, engineering faculty, as African American engineering faculty, has been at 2.5% for the last 10 years, and just recently, last year, it dipped down to 2.4%. This is in spite of some well-funded, really well-intentioned interventions to move this number. So the work of me and my team is to try to get more STEMers to pursue the professorate, in spite of their experiences that tell them that they want to do anything other than be at a university, right? So why do I do this? Well, I realized that even a small cohort of African American STEMers who pursue the professorate can form networks and win tenure and be part of the technological and intellectual innovation of STEM. I mean, if you think about it, one person who joins the faculty over a course of 30 to 40 years will train hundreds of new STEMers who will there in turn train hundreds more. So I believe that the reason why we're considering going to Mars in 2025 and not were there 10 years ago is because we're only tapping into 50% of the diversity to build the innovation. And if you don't think that diversity matters, there's been mathematical models. So I would advise you to look up the book, The Difference by Scott Page. They have mathematically tested that diverse groups lead to more innovation and more intellectual stimulation than non-diverse groups. So we as a country, as the world, are suffering by only tapping into 50% of the talent. And Dr. Mae Jemison, who is my girlfriend in my mind, she's not really, but I just feel like if she just met me, we'd be friends for life. But one of the things she says about Mars is it will not be our technological capacity that will be the death or the challenge of going to Mars. It will be our ability to appreciate human and potentially non-human difference. What she anticipates will happen in Mars is that technologically we'll get there and we'll revolt over the same things that we're revolting over in this country, right? So we don't fix or try to understand the full humanity of difference and create places and spaces where we are celebrated, not simply tolerated, this will continue to do overall damage to our ability to do STEM in a way that has some moral consciousness.
She's my auntie.
I will be that.
Yeah, no, and like Mae Jemison, like when I remember being 10 and like seeing her jumpsuit with her helmet tucked up on, I was like, oh, yes, I could be an astronaut. And I knew that I could be an astronaut because I saw Mae Jemison, which leads me into my response to this. But will you repeat your question so that I can like frame my response correctly?
The question is, can you take up one of these contexts and speak to your vision of hope, of equality of opportunity?
I can. Okay. So my vision of hope and equality of opportunity has to do with literacy education in the K-12 space. Literacy to me, and honestly, like, I think our typical definitions of literacy are a little bit limited. I think of literacy as the ability to position yourself in the world in relation to others. So it involves reading, it involves writing, it involves articulation, it involves, being able to interact and communicate with other people. And from the time, like, reading and writing became a thing, it has always been something that was used for profit. Like, if you look at the history of literacy here in the United States, I've done some research on just the South. Like, we'll just take the South. Originally, rich white boys were taught to read and write. Rich white girls were taught only to read, and everybody else was just kind of SOL. And of course, as time has gone on, we've discovered how necessary it is to be able to read and to be able to write and to be able to communicate with other people. Like, you can't make any kind of progress in the world if you don't know how to interact with other people and interact with the world around you and interact with the status quo. So for me, I have hope that the world can change as we give kids, not even K-12, like birth through 18, any kid that is in school. Kids need to have an equal opportunity, not only to read books, learn how to read, learn how to write, but to see themselves reflected in literature. Because honestly, literature sets the tone for everything we do. So I get real mad sometimes when I look at the literary canon and like how we are taught to interact with it. Just like you said, you would like to see more people of color in the professorate in STEM. We also need to see more people of color reading books and writing books and like reflected in books. And there's something but we just got to figure out a way to make it appealing, because I feel like as we have progressed through time, where you see yourself succeeding, where you see images of yourself succeeding, are where you're most likely to kind of put your attention. So until we do have more representation of people in STEM and more representation of people of color in literature, I think cycles will perpetuate, but things can change, as I think we've seen over the course of the last 50 years. And hopefully they continue to.
Thank you, Nick.
I have very mixed feelings about hope. So I'm going to try to describe it in two ways. The hope that I have about something I know is unattainable. And that might not be a great word to have just said, but okay. And the hope that I feel is attainable. So anti-Black racism is a global phenomenon. I think it's unattainable to not live with that reality in the next several lifetimes. But I am hopeful that we make room to grow in taming the trauma it is causing and wreaking across the globe. But it's not just anti-Black racism or racism writ large, it's militarism, it's a lot of things. And in this particular book, what really stands out to me is something that Bell Hooks describes, a great influence of mine in Teaching to Transgress. If I can just take a second. Bell Hooks cites Dr. King from this book, and she writes, as he writes, "We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit, motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A civilization can flounder as readily in the face of moral and spiritual bankruptcy as it can through financial bankruptcy. Today," Dr. King writes, "we live in the midst of that floundering. We live in chaos, uncertain about the possibility of building and sustaining community. I am still living in that floundering time. And I think it is unattainable, but it doesn't mean I don't work every day toward it. That every day, through the work that I do in mathematics classrooms with children, I remind them that even though the white institutional space of schooling, all they want from you is to be readied as human capital to shift you into a pipeline only to send you further into white institutional space called a race and gender stratified STEM workforce, where you will experience trauma, where you will experience fibroids, where you will experience early and over death. Sweetheart, I see your dignity. I see the respect you seek in the relationships with your peers and from your teacher, from mathematics as a discipline itself. I will fight for your rightful presence in this space. Even though I know this space will always be white institutional space, the rightful presence of our children in them has got to be fought for on a daily basis. I believe that revolution of values where our profit will no longer trump, sorry, choice of words, person is unattainable, but gosh, it doesn't mean I won't stop. In terms of the attainable hope, which I think was just beyond Dr. King's reach at the time, not because of any limitation of him, but of the time itself, is that what it will take today to safeguard the liberation of a cisgendered, heterosexual, Christian Black man is a different call than to safeguard the non-cisgendered, let's say transgender Black woman in America who is experiencing violence from the police, who's experiencing discrimination in the workforce, who's experiencing domestic violence, whose right to adopt children is being denied. To safeguard Black liberation and hope for that transgendered person is a different call than was within Dr. King's reach at that time, despite Bayard Rustin in his ear. Where we are today, there is a whole different set of liberations available to us that have to be advocated and fought for. And I believe this is the hope that even if not articulated in King's words, we can take up, and I do believe that is attainable and within our reach, even living in a state like Tennessee. Coming from a state like California where I lived for 20 years, I believe I should fight for the rightful presence not only of the children in their mathematics classrooms, but for every possible form of human life and experience, as you have pointed out on Mars, right here in Nashville. As we stand here, we know that in January, HB 2351 takes effect. And suddenly, people who look like me better carry their papers because the police may be coming. We are moving toward a sanctioned two-party apartheid state in this state. That has to be within my reach. This is my backyard. This is my country. That, I believe, is the attainable hope that Dr. King gives me, that I can see, even if all that other stuff doesn't feel that way.
Can you just adopt me?
Very, very powerful.
Dang.
Taking notes.
I have asked asked Chris or someone to pass out lyrics. You all have the lyrics. Wonderful. This is Kendrick Lamar, who is the 2018 Pulitzer Prize winner for music. He is the first in the history of, Pulitzer Prize winners to win as a rapper. People are usually in jazz or classical music. Some have called him the contemporary Dr. King, or Dr. King 2.0, because his lyrics communicate the burden of a generation's mind set in an era of chaos and insidiousness, of racial injustice. I would like for us to listen to his song. It's called All Right. And then I'm going to ask our panelists if they would just provide a reaction to the lyrics as it relates to racial justice and the continued fight for liberation. And that reaction can be any way. It can be personal, it can be connected to your work, or any way you would like to have that happen. Okay.
We can get it in dance now.
Right?
Lost my life, I has to fight.
There we go.
All right. Okay. I got this question. So, although he was the first to get the Pulitzer Prize, Pulitzer Prize, yes, he shouldn't have been. He shouldn't have been. So, I think I'm probably the most senior person on this panel, but Public Enemy, KRS-One, African Bambaataa, the Sugar Hill Gang. I mean, I could go on, but I'm just gonna stop right there, right? So, I know we hear booty, 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 booty now, or black and yellow, but that's not the history of hip hop and rap music. I mean, it started from a racially and social consciousness as we talked about the poverty, right? There's no way to sexily talk about poverty, but we figured out how to do it through rap and hip hop. Some of the first conversations in the African American community about mental health happened through rap and hip hop, right? So there is a historical legacy that I hope this young brother recognizes, that he's standing on the shoulders of great rappers of our day who didn't get their due recognition. But I also want to just take a moment, something that Tesha, my sis, said about the LGBTQ plus community. Now, I'm from the south side of Chicago. And if it, all right, south side, okay, recognize. And if it wasn't socially conscious rap and hip hop in my teenage years, it was house music. I mean, house music saved my life. And if you meet anybody else on the south side of Chicago, I'm sure you'll hear that over and over again. A place that we could freely express who we are. And the music was culturally affirming. And I remember dancing with queens, which is a historically correct language that we use, white, gay, transgender males called us queens, and we called them queens. So I'm gay, and I was born this way. I was rocking to that when I was 16 years old. And I didn't know it was socializing me to understand the full humanity of people whose sexual orientation isn't like mine, but that's what happened. So now when we have conversations and people are trying to make laws over who somebody chooses to love, it just doesn't resonate with me, because I grew up in a space where that music was just as affirming as an Afrocentric beat from another house jam, right? So to be socialized in that era was such a blessing for me. I want to end by saying, Nicole, I truly appreciate this question, Because when you talk to students of color and you ask them, when you were thinking about losing it all, dropping out, or worst, and when I say worst, I mean the worst, and they say, and I say, what did you do to sustain you? Family, spirituality, and music, or music dance. And I appreciate this university's attempt to do how to build a resume or how to do a cover letter or job talk, but we really need to tap into the things that African Americans and other students of color use when it gets too much, right? We need to have more family-oriented events where people's families can come. We need to tap into the cultural affirmation of music, and we need to tap into spirituality, including religion, but not necessarily religion. So I really greatly appreciate this question, and I'm proud of you for doing this. Yeah.
And I just like following you. You just say these very smart things. And not only does Vanderbilt need to do that and other spaces need to do that, we got to do it without judgment. Because when me and my like young adult writer friends found out Kendrick had won the Pulitzer, we like turned up. When I tell you we turned up, listen, y'all don't want to know what that means. We had a darn good time, okay? But this is literacy. Rap music is literacy. When we didn't have books, we was looking at Tupac. Tupac was telling us stuff that we knew from our experience, but like all of a sudden everybody's bumping to it, everybody wants to listen to it, and that is validating. It validates your existence. STEM is literacy. Math is literacy. All of these things, and the fact that like now we're getting into this time in this space where there's this collision happening. Like, I have always been that girl who shows up to school in a Harry Potter t-shirt and Jordans. Like, there are these little things that we've always seen as disparate kind of stuff, right? Like, you can't be a nerd and be cool. You can't be into rap music and actually like going to school. That's not true. And the fact that we are now seeing these things collide, we're seeing Black culture celebrated in a way that, like, I mean, I'm excited about it. I love walking into a room and being like the coolest person there. Like, it's really, it's exciting. It's really exciting. So when I hear this song and when I think about Kendrick Lamar, it always makes me think of the reaction I get when I go into a high school and they hear that I listen to the music that they listen to and that I like dress the way that they dress and I'm wearing the latest pair of shoes that everybody wants. Those things are important when you're interacting with kids who, like, the only things that they see as positive representations of themselves are rappers and athletes, you know? So it's up to us who exist in these other spaces, authors, teachers, you know, mathematicians, physicists. Yeah. We have to meet kids where they are. And that is gonna involve, you know, kind of coming down off that high horse a little bit. Being willing to like crank up a little Kendrick Lamar and take the time to listen to the lyrics, you know? Yeah, it's got an MF here and there, but like, who cares, right? Like, I was dropping F-bombs when I was in first grade. Why is this a big deal? And I think that, I think it's really vitally important that we remove the judgment from, you know, popular culture. Why do we judge popular culture when it is actually reaching our kids? The things that we want to change in the world, we need to actually use the avenues available to us to change them and not judge them. Because Kendrick, listen, Kendrick be out here doing his thing.
So Kendrick Lamar was a high school student in the high school I was in Compton. Wasn't my student, but he was there at the same time. My husband remembers him well. My husband was the principal at the time. Yeah, it's an old story, principal and teacher. But he remembers Kendrick quite well. Kendrick was a straight A student at Centennial High, Big Ten, as we like to call it out there. So I was very proud from that perspective, for sure. When I read these lyrics, I think, and when I listen to this music, so first of all, the relationship my family has to this music is when the kids have a bad day, they ask for two things. Either the KRS song that's like, whoop, whoop, is the sound of the police. There's something about that beat that makes my son feel better. Or All Right. And in particular, what I like about this song is it reminds me of, for those of you who were at Monique Morris's talk last year in her book about Push Out, which are the ways in which African American girls are being systematically pushed out of schools and into the justice system, the injustice system, we may want to call it, in what she doesn't describe as a school-to-prison pipeline, but rather a sexual assault-to-prison pipeline, right? So a trauma-to-prison pipeline for African American girls. So at the end of Dr. Morris's talk, she looked around the room and she said, you know, I tell the girls one thing, just plain and simple. And as an African American woman herself saying this, it was very clear to me what she meant. She says, you know what? We got us. Mm-hmm. And there is something so profoundly self-deterministic in that claim of a black woman speaking to black children saying, we got us. That I can say to my children when they, for example, my son was asked to dress up as the president of the Confederacy in his second grade history assignment. He chose it because he thought the name Jefferson was a black person. He didn't know Jefferson Davis wasn't. I didn't either. I'm driving home like a fool, going like, oh, baby, we're going to look him up. You get in the tub. I'll check out who he is. It's going to be fun. And you had to bring in 5 objects to represent your person. So my son's in the tub, and I'm pulling this up, and I'm like, excuse me? This man is not even an American. When he lost, he chose not to even join the country. And my son got this as we had just moved from California. You can imagine what I was thinking. How quickly can one sell their house? And I thought to myself, oh, no, we need to right this wrong because, and then when I emailed the teacher, I said, what would you like me to do? Make slave shackles out of aluminum foil with him at night? What exactly is he going to bring in to represent someone who's an apologist for slavery? No child, white or black or mixed, should stand as an apologist for slavery in a school function standing next to someone else. Can he write about Jefferson Davis? Yes, because he's in the White House right now. We should know where they are and while they think, but you should not have to dress up like him. In that way, songs like All Right represent to me, we got this. We got you. And there's a history of people who have you, sweetheart. Because on the morning after Trump was elected, my son asked, are they coming for us now, Mama? Because he had seen a black man beaten at a Trump rally. And we stopped watching television after that happened. It was too much, the move to the South, the Trump signs in our neighborhood, and then that beating. And I said, no, baby, they are not coming for you. I promise you they won't. And for the first time in my child's entire life, he looked at me and said, you don't know, Mama, you're not black. I had never experienced that distance before from him. He said, they're coming for me, for Daddy, and my sister. He said her name, Madhavi. And he was right, I didn't know. I don't know what my son and my daughter are walking every day. I don't. But I'm working hard to figure it out. And when I need it, Kendrick Lamar is on full blast in the car. Because if I don't have you, baby, somebody does. And I will find that person. He's got you. And the beauty of the lyrics here, as he talks about Lucifer, Lucy, right? The Lucy in here is Lucifer. There is evil all around you. You will never eradicate it. You have to pet that dog. You have to know that racial capitalism is real, and you may want the latest Jordans and the latest Nikes and the looking good and all that, but you better fight for justice too. Yep. Both of those things, just as you're describing for children, are possible to, it's like syncretic. They seem like they shouldn't go together, but they can. And to be able to tell my child, you can be flawed, you can suffer in varieties of ways, struggling with alcohol, struggling with addiction, struggling with all kinds of things that this country has conspired to create for you, but we got you. If not me, then the history of your people that is bone deep got you. And I love that about this song. So whether or not he gets it, and we could go back and do like reparation Pulitzers for all the other, for KRS-One, I'm right there with you. I'd like to put TLC on that list.
For real.
Right,
Tupac,
that's right.
Tupac
I'd like to take some people out of the repertoire as well. I'm gonna just go ahead and let Nelly go. See you, bye-bye. But I'm sorry.
Well, I guess this was the right choice because I hadn't talked to them at all. All right. This last slide really exemplifies, I think, the tensions that we see in Nick's book. There continues to be challenges Black communities face. However, they still rise and surpass those challenges to become great. For example, we have Black women winning major political positions today. At the same time, we have mass incarceration. These 3 Black girls here, India Skinner, Michaela Sharif, and Bria Snell, were finalists in a NASA competition. When they took to social media to get their votes, racist trolls from 4chan tried to ensure they didn't win. We also have generations of young people who are taking to protesting like never before. So with those things in mind, and as you think about where we're headed in these United States, what are some implications that either for your work, for the world, perhaps for the city of Nashville, you can take up any context you want, but we want to hear about implications. And when this last question is done, we will open it up for questions from the audience.
I'm really anxious to hear from the audience, so I'll try to answer this question as quickly as possible. One of the things that I am beginning to look at is the downside of privilege. So I had previously talked about the differences between basically white privilege and people of color. But I also believe that you can only step on the backs of entire groups of color for so long until it will eventually come to bite you. So I'm reminded of the opioid epidemic. And some legislation was actually just passed today, but scholars say it's a drop in a very large bucket. And I'm wondering if we treated the victims of the crack cocaine epidemic like victims, would we have more justice for the opioid epidemic that is largely impacting white, often middle-class communities? When I think about the toxic waste landfills that were built in Black and brown communities and how those environments have impacted folks' health to the highest extremes, those landfills are full. So could toxic waste dumps be coming to a white suburb near you? And I'm thinking about the financial crash of 2009, where Black, brown, people of color, and low-income people just wanted to tap into the American dream and were met with racist loans that crashed the country, and some white folks got hurt too. So I'm wondering if we could imagine the connections that if you don't understand the difference in full humanity of people, it will one day hurt you too. So that's where my research is going.
Thank you. Surprise, surprise, I totally agree. And additionally, I would say that it's already hurting everyone. I think about rhetoric and the way that we talk about racism, the way that we talk about privilege, the way that we talk about these big concepts that eventually people just don't want to talk about anymore. But whiteness is a social construct, and it's something that negatively impacts white people too, just like you're saying. And I think about interacting with some of the white kids that I've interacted with over the past year as I've traveled talking about this book. There are things that come with being white that aren't fun. Like white people struggle with perfectionism. This is statistically proven. Struggle with stuff like perfectionism on like off the charts. Anxiety and depression are hugely they're big problems, and all of that has to do with having this standard that you have to meet just because of the way you look. So I think that for me, a lot of the implications of y'all's work and my work, a lot of it just, I think that we are starting to see these fissures, these cracks in the foundations of our society, in the foundations of, even the way we think about people in general. And honestly, I can't wait for everything to just shatter and then we all just fall down and have to get back up and, oh wait, look, we're standing on equal ground.
That's a dream. Yeah, dream on.
That's right.
I know, right? I will dream on.
So many of us were probably raised in a time of boutique multiculturalism, where you had sort of Cesar Chavez Day, you had Rosa Parks Day, you had Dr. King's Day, right? And we understood this as, I mean, on one hand, it's white institutional space's best effort. On the other hand, it was a logic that is roots deep in the United States, which is divide and conquer. If you never talk about the ways in which these posters are actually sharing aspects of their narratives and histories, then we can never think about oppression in its multitudinous ways that Dr. McGee is describing here. So one of the things I hope is that we are reminded that coalitional politics is part of the American way. And the question is, what are the coalitions united for a variety of reasons that will undergird so many of the efforts that we're seeing so-called outcomes of here on this slide? So if we look even at the time of the civil rights movement, there was a great number of GLBTIQ rights activists and civil rights activists working together because they shared the common oppression of police brutality. But today, these are communities somehow described as if pitted against each other, right? Often through some odd rhetoric about Christianity, which is not actually true, right? So in these ways, if we can reach across the aisle, and I'm not talking about politics, I'm talking about communities, we reach across the aisle to our common injustices and common possibilities, the coalitional politics moving forward where we show up not just at the rally about mass incarceration, but also mass deportation, both of which are separating mothers from their children, then we will start to understand the ways in which these structures are organized against all of us in a variety of ways and move through the steps that it would take to make progress against them. But for as long as divide and conquer, where we understand oppression as discrete modules that affect discrete peoples, we have no hope. So my hope in looking across this is that we find that coalitional politics in our blood and we live up to it as we move forward in this country.
Thank you. Can we give our panelists